getting ready for the incredible sound of classic rock? No? Good, because now it's time for Visiting the Village.
Hello and welcome to Visiting the Village. I'm Paul Kilduff-Taylor, and joining me as ever is the infinitesimally apt Ian Hardingham.
Hello Mr. Paul Kilduff-Taylor. As you may remember, I patched myself a few weeks ago, but people aren't happy with the changes, so I'm rolling it back.
Let's get out of this dungeon.
It's the top story.
Hi-Res's ancient F2P shooter Tribes Ascend has just received a massive patch, including some big changes and also refunding everyone's in-game currency. What does this mean for Tribes?
This is pretty cool. I want to talk about Tribes Ascend for a while. I can't remember when Tribes Ascend came out, or when even it started beta. I feel like it was probably 2010. No, 2011, I think.
Yeah.
I'm a huge Tribes 2 fan. Tribes Ascend was pretty good. The thing I remember most about it, which probably isn't the thing I should remember most about it, is that the president of Hi-Res came out a little bit after release and talked about how much of a passion project it was, and that it was basically a massive failure for them commercially. I think he said that it cost upwards of $20 million to make, and it was supposed to originally be an F2P success. I remember when I first bought it, they were heavily into the F2P, but they offered a $30 sort of complete pack, which sort of gave you most of the stuff in it, which I was very happy to buy that and not have to engage with F2P. But I have a bit of a soft spot for it beyond my Tribes love, because this guy came out and said it's a massive passion project, and he spent all this money making this thing, and it didn't make any. And this is, for me, one of the first kind of higher profile core F2P failures, even though, as with a lot of these things, you don't generally get a news story when it's failed, because failure is sort of slow and intangible with these kind of things. But really, the main thing I was pleased about with this new patch is that they actually removed quite a lot of the changes to the old Tribes template that were clearly necessitated by the F2P nature of the game. So very important in old Tribes that you had the light, medium and heavy armor types, and then you could basically plug any different weapon into any different armor type. Tribes Ascend went for a class-based system. It still had light, medium and heavy armor, but you didn't really have very much freedom in terms of what weapons you put in which slots depending on those. It was just all about the classes. So it's still a little class-based, but it's gone a lot more back in the direction of being a free-form construct your own guy thing, which I really appreciate. I mean, in general, I just think everything that they've done with Tribes Ascend has been pretty ethical. I think that right from the start they have really tried to make it the definitive game for fans of the series. It's not the definitive game for me, because original Tribes, much faster than Tribes 2, much more based on acrobatics, less based on base building, and I was much happier with Tribes 2. But it's still a great game, and I'm happy to see this patch.
Yeah, it was always an interesting one, because it did look like it was doing well for a long time, and then they came out, I think it was on Reddit actually, he made a post, and we probably talked about it on the show before, where he really made it very clear that it was an extreme commercial failure. I mean, there was no way that you could say it was a success by any metric. So I definitely like this. I think, Smite has been doing well, so that's clearly keeping them going. So they obviously learned a lot from making Tribes Ascend. I mean, you would think that kind of with such a bad failure of the business model, it might be risky for them to go on and do sort of other slightly similar business models, but I believe Smite is somewhat similar. So it's clearly worth doing from an educational point of view, as a lot of game failures are. But it's great that they've decided to come back and then just make it better. Like, if there's some obvious things you can do to make it better, to have something kicking around, as part of your legacy, that's good. I found the comments on this on PC Gamer really illuminating of the traditional approaches people take. There was someone complaining about how Hi-Rez always abandon games when they've literally done the opposite. They've kept this game going, and now they've gone back and fixed it at great, cost to themselves. So there's someone just complaining about that. There was someone saying that the reason people left was because there were no mod tools, which is always it's another classic one. The reason the game failed with no mod tools, and also someone saying that it was bullet spam. Particular kinds of weapons enable people to do bullet spam, and that made the game too much like Call of Duty. So you really get this whole kind of spectrum of things. It just shows it's so hard to nail down why these things don't work.
Yeah, I think it's tough being the developer of a redux of a really popular old game, or indeed any popular online game. To address one of your points there, I don't think Tribes Ascend was their first F2P game. I think they had success with something before Tribes Ascend, and then I think Smite came out actually originally at a similar time to Tribes as well.
Yeah.
So I think they had. I mean, it's always been paid for by other things, as we're talking about.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we need to go into any kind of deeper conversation about, would this have been better as a pay-once title? Did F2P hurt it in any way? I don't actually think that's the case here. Like I said, they always went out of their way to not let F2P ruin the party.
Yeah.
I'm really glad it's here. The last thing I really want to talk about on this topic, slightly related, the reason I don't play Tribes Ascend anymore is because playing this kind of game makes me angry. Like, it really tires me out. I don't have to play for very long before I get really tired by it. Puts me in a grumpy mood. And I really miss playing Tribes. And one of the things, I'm always got my eye out for which games kind of do this to me. Really, really get on my nerves and kind of are too reactive and require too much twitch stuff. And I really think that even though I was a much younger man then, Tribes 2, just by dint of being slower, it was a harder game to control. In a lot of ways, it was like controlling the space shuttle. How slowly you reacted to the boost compared to classic Tribes 1. And I really think there's a big deal there. And that there are games which, for whatever reason, do not require as much of your attention as constantly, and that leads to not tiring you out so quickly. So it's the kind of thing that I really look for. People always talk about loving R games, they're turn-based games, because, obviously there's no question of that here. But it is possible to make real-time games that are like that as well. Platformers don't tend to be too nerve-wracking to play.
Yeah. I always find it interesting with games how long it takes you to adapt to the control and the feel. I mean, Rocket League we talked about to death. Nuclear Throne we're going to talk about to death has kind of an odd... I find Nuclear Throne feels a bit sluggish on almost every platform, but that's kind of part of how it works. Like, it has a little bit of weight to it. It's not kind of instant frame perfect jumping around. You've got to, kind of slightly roll the character around, and maybe that's part of why it feels so good. So yeah, control in these games, Tribes is something that really rewards your practice in terms of controlling the character, and it's all very analog. It's not sort of like frame perfect practice. It's about kind of just generally being good at movement and good at targeting, and that's a sort of a pleasing thing to get better at. But yeah, as you say, people have limited lifespan to play that kind of game, definitely.
Absolutely.
Klifsky has written a post calling for increased state regulation of in-game purchases, citing Star Citizen as an example of this getting out of control. Do you think we need tougher laws?
I don't know. I had mixed feelings reading this post by Klifsky. I know that they're technically both about in-game purchases, but I felt there was a bit of conflation between the Star Citizen issue and then the advertising issue. Klifsky talks a lot about how effective advertising can be, how much analysis is going on inside these bigger companies of how to get the most effective adverts, likening them to other things that can be addictive. And I think there are two separate issues there. I was reading it, I was trying to work out whether I think there's a problem with advertising. I kind of could come from one of two different directions on this. I think that it's part of the world we live in is being exposed to a lot more information all of the time. I don't think it's just about advertising. I think it's just the way the internet has allowed us to live in certain ways. And I think that developing a good filter of information that you see online is a really important part of being a person nowadays. And I think I'm always sort of wary about making the laws on advertising too stringent. I think that we've also, as people, have got to learn how to filter stuff out. What do you think about that?
I think that, you're right. This is a slight conflation of these issues. I think the most important thing to look at here is people who are spending higher amounts of money in these games. And I almost think the legislation should be based on that and not around anything to do with advertising and not around anything to do with, what you're able to offer in these games. So, yes, you have advertising standards laws, and that's fine. And those generally, I think, work okay. Possibly. There's definitely been some stuff recently in terms of how certain people are portrayed in adverts, which people feel needs some advertising law change. Not going to get into that now, but advertising law is a work in progress, so I feel happy to ignore that. But I think when you have people who are clearly addicted to these games, who are clearly spending very, very large amounts of money on a regular basis, then I think you probably need some legal stuff around how you handle them. But what form that would take, I don't know, because you need those people to make these games work. A lot of these people enjoy, they have the money and they enjoy spending it. There was a really good feature which we covered recently about a guy who spends insane amounts of money in Star Citizen, but he loves it. He's really happy to do that. That's what he wants to spend his money on. But I think you've got to step in when people need protecting, and I think there are classes of people here who need protection.
Yeah, I kind of would like to see someone who is addicted to something like Game of War or something like that, causing them to spend too much money. I kind of want to see what that looks like for someone for whom that's damaging. Obviously, a lot of the people who do this are people who can genuinely afford it. Mm-hmm. There are things that you can spend a lot of money on, and if you can afford it, and that's kind of okay. These games are still giving people pleasure. We tend to say that the really bad side of addiction starts when you're only really enjoying this thing as part of an addiction loop, and it's not really adding anything to your life, and you'd be happier if you weren't doing it at all. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I spend a lot of money on Kindle nowadays. I buy a lot of science fiction books every single month. I don't think it's anything damaging. But in some ways, I sort of liken that to this. So I really enjoy browsing for buying new science fiction books. I'll read all of the book or half of the book, sometimes a quarter of the book. It's just something I enjoy doing. It adds pleasure to my life. I'm sure no one's going to say that that's a bad thing. It's books.
Yeah.
But I think it's hard to, we can say, oh my goodness, little Timmy is spending $1,000 a month on Game of War, and we can, turn our noses up at Game of War. But I don't feel like I understand really the sensation that it's even giving you. I don't know if I think it's just as sort of straightforwardly bad addiction as as heroin or something. You're even on that line.
Yes.
Gambling, etc. Like, I just don't understand necessarily, because it doesn't feel like it's gambling either. I just don't know what. Are people getting stuff from it?
I think people get very close to gambling style behaviour with some F2P stuff. And there isn't that much sort of to stop problem gambling. I think the point is really kind of the point I made originally, is like, how do you make a law that benefits these people? I don't really know how you start doing that, even without unintended negative consequences from that law. I just don't know how you make it better for them. I mean, Cliff mentions people who might have mental health compulsive behaviour problems, and I think that those people could be in real trouble when exposed to these games, but also people who have conditions like that can get into trouble with lots of things. So does that mean that you need more legislation? It's just something that needs to be explored hugely. I mean, I think everyone's had some experiences with games. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably play a lot of games. You've probably had some experiences that were negative. I'd say the only sort of recent one for me would be when I was trying to complete Super Hexagon, and that game gave me some very strong negative emotions at certain times. Like, it made me very, very angry and depressed occasionally. And that's when you get so heavily into something that you invest a lot in it, it can have a very powerful emotional effect on you. But that's up to you and the people around you to deal with, I think.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much the only thing that really depresses me now on that kind of terms is tennis. I invest a lot in tennis and get pretty annoyed when I don't play very well. I don't think I tend to invest enough in computer games anymore to get that kind of feeling. I certainly don't throw my Vita across the room like I used to throw my old Game Boy across the room. Yeah, I mean, this just sort of gets... Again, it just goes into one of these really difficult to answer questions. You've got, in general, if you're a functional adult, you have to have the ability to control this kind of stuff, to understand that drains on your time and drains your money can be damaging, and there definitely need to be controls to stop children buying stuff like this. I mean, the thing is, if you're less than 18 or less than 16, you just don't have that much money, and the difference is that if you're 15 and you spend all the money in your bank account, it doesn't matter because that money is only to have fun with. But if you're an adult, then you spend all the money in your bank account, then you're probably in trouble.
I think
I don't know. I'm not massively evangelical about having no government control or having a lot of government control. I feel really bad for people who aren't able to control themselves to this extent. But I can't personally imagine being addicted to Game of War, whereas I can imagine being addicted to a drug. Certainly, I'm not really a gambler. I just find it difficult to understand what going down that path would be like.
Sure. I mean, yeah, that's one aspect of this, is that it's difficult to know what the experience is. I mean, maybe something that could be done is you could get to the point where if someone's spending above a certain amount per month on entertainment, the developer is required to send them information about where they can get counselling and information about that situation in general in their life. And that person might laugh at that and go, oh, I don't need this, I'm happy, I'm fine. And that's fine, but maybe there is some arbitrary point at which you could intervene and say, this is a very significant behaviour for this person, so you need to make sure that they have access at least to some avenue to think about it more objectively. I don't know if that would work.
I think that's a nice idea. I don't particularly think it would be... Well, I'm just wondering if you could actually cap the amount someone can spend on one area. I mean, I'm thinking about, for some reason, I'm thinking about gyms a lot this week. I recently started having some personal training every week, which is like £25 for an hour, and it kind of made me realise how much easier it is to train when you have a personal trainer, how effective it is, and the fact that it's £25 an hour. That's fine when it's like 1 hour a week. Or it is for me, but you could have 10 hours a week. I mean, you could do it every day. You could have 7 hours of PT a week, and that would be really useful for yourself. And then that would cost an awful lot of money. So that's kind of the only thing that I can think of outside of games where I could really easily imagine spending too much money.
Yeah.
And kind of also in sort of a way which doesn't really feel like it's so completely over the top, like, going and buying a bottle of Cristal every night or something.
Yeah.
So I don't know, would it be okay for, people to limit gyms, charging you? Like, just no one has ever found a good way of making that work, because there are people with a lot of money who would hate that, and of course, the development companies would dislike it too.
Yeah, no, that's a really good example, because people do get into negative relationships with that as well, with exercise and with spending money. You can buy every gym subscription, you can buy all this stuff, nutritional stuff. You can really ruin your life with trying to go too far down that route as well. Yeah, you're right. I don't think there's a good example of a law existing previously that can necessarily help with this. I mean, I know gambling legislation is quite complicated, so there may be stuff there that we don't know about. But yes, it's really difficult. I thought this was an interesting post. Just to quickly bounce back to the Star Citizen thing, people are getting really annoyed that these incredibly expensive ships, you can't really use them yet. You can look at them, you can kind of use them, I think, in the dogfighting mode. I mean, I have to say that I fail to get angry about this, actually. I really fail to get angry about it, because if it's known what the thing is, it doesn't matter what the developer is sort of potentially promising might happen. You have to take that with a pinch of salt. So if you're happy...
I completely agree with you on that one.
Yeah.
I think there are lots of places in life where you can spend a huge amount of money on things like miniatures. And yeah, maybe there's some extra promise because, but it's just like, there have been lots of companies that have launched product lines that are like this, with the idea that it'll last for 10 years and they'll grow it into some massive thing, and it never happens. I mean, at least with me buying the ship, it's actually, to me, a lot less sort of ethically worrying than pre-ordering the game.
Yeah.
Because the ship exists. I mean, it's something, like you say, you can only look at it. Well, you can look at it.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And we've talked quite a lot about what collecting looks like online, collecting of digital items. I just have absolutely no problem with it. And I don't even think people are particularly stupid for doing it. If I go around to someone's house and he's got an amazingly expensive weird belt from somewhere, it's like, that's cool. Sometimes people like spending money on really weird things.
Yes.
And this looks cool and is original and unique and has a story attached to it. I mean, And $100 million is how much that Star Citizen has raised now. By far, the aspect I worry more about is the people who actually are expecting it to turn out to be a great game. Them selling ships is kind of a cool byline for me.
Yeah, right. I agree. And yeah, just to round this off, I think that the thing with the ships is just, like you say, it's fine as an item in itself. But, I mean, we're really careful about this, probably more careful than most devs. When you say that you're going to do something when someone pre-orders your game, you should do that. Like, everyone makes mistakes with that. We've said that some things would be in that weren't. With Frozen Synapse, we're really cagey about that, and we were really cagey about doing press previews and saying what things are. Eventually you get worn down and you say, yeah, we're going to do this thing, because you really believe at that time that you are, and then it might not end up happening. But with Star Citizen, I think they've been very bold about saying, we are going to do these ridiculous things. And for some people, I just don't think they're able to evaluate that properly. They get too excited about it. So I do feel like they should have been clearer about what is speculative and what isn't.
Yeah, to finish it off, today is the release of Elite Dangerous's Horizons, expand-alone thing, which allows you to land on planets and stuff. And it's just kind of like, this is such a tortoise and hare story, because really, back at the beginning, Elite Dangerous looked like the really boring sort of younger brother of Star Citizen. And just slowly and surely, they're making that game even better. They've got a really core understanding that, like, slow exploration of the universe is really, really awesome. They've got their niche, and they're just expanding on it really slowly. They're making a lot of money, and they're not doing anything wrong.
Yes.
Which, it being David Braben, amazes the hell out of me. And here's Star Citizen, which is just, like, turning more and more vaporware. So it's really amazing.
It is. Girl has finally wrapped around and reached the Earth. If you don't know what the hell I'm talking about, then you obviously aren't familiar with Nobby Nobby Boy, Katamari Damacy creator Keita Takahashi's mad, somewhat collaborative opus. Ian Hoddingham, are you happy Girl has reached the Earth?
I'm overwhelmingly happy. Nobby Nobby Boy is awesome. I had this is probably the best arty thing I've ever done as a person. At I think it was my 27th or 28th birthday party, which was at our weird village hall. The village that this podcast is named for. I got my PS3 in and hooked up Jeff's projector and allowed people to play Nobby Nobby Boy, because Nobby Nobby Boy is my favourite art game of all time.
Yeah.
Because it's actually, like, really fun to play around with, but it's also very gamey, and a lot of art games are very specifically non-gamey. Like, they're often not about reflecting the values of games, because they're trying to be arty in different ways. And I think Nobby Nobby Boy is a really awesome art game for gamers, so I love it. And I think that the case is that Girl... Oh, my mobile phone went off. Now I'm really a professional. I think the case is that Girl expanded at the rate that players expanded Nobby Nobby Boy in their games, which was the main part of the game.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a multiplayer involved, because, the solar system is really, really big. So I slightly doubt that Girl has linearly grown with the pushings of the PlayStation 3 controller. So I guess there's some kind of multiplier. But I don't know if I'm making any sense at all. But I love Nobby Nobby Boy. You were there when it was first announced, weren't
That's
you?
right, at Game City, yes. I was sitting with Brandon Boyer, who might be the world's biggest Nobby Nobby Boy fan ever at the time. Yeah, we saw Keita Takahashi announce it, and it was one of those things where, like, he gave the controller to someone in the audience to mess around with, and they were playing with the character while he was talking. He was talking through a translator, and it was one of the most bizarre presentations I've ever seen in my life. And he took some questions, and he's amazing when answering questions. Someone said, what's your design process? And he says, I don't design anything, I'm not a designer, and then laughs. And that's the way he kind of answers questions. He's brilliant. And then he went off to design a playground, which I think still hasn't been made. But there was lots of good concept art, which seems to heavily focus on dogs' anuses, if I remember correctly, which was very odd. But yeah, this is great. I love this stuff. He's fun. He makes things that are fun. Nobby Nobby Boy is hilarious. It's a very weird idea. It's great that it got made. Fantastic. More fun in games.
win.
Win. Game wagering, the business model that people in every generation think is a good idea to try for some reason, usually naming their company something so bad it makes you cringe harder than a comedy sketch based on some aspect of gamer culture, is back. VG247 reports that a company called Gaimers, G-A-I-M-E-R-Z, Gaimers, is offering a matchmaking system for cash wagering. Ian Hardingham, what would you stake on wagering ever being viable?
Not very much, I suppose. Wait, I'm going to try and talk about this intelligently, maybe. So, as far as I'm aware, this basically allows you to... So, this is peer-to-peer video game wagering.
Yeah.
I think the idea being that you and me might, like, decide to bet £10 on who wins the next round of Rocket League or something.
Yeah.
The idea is to bet with your friends. And I don't bet with my friends. So, not something that I would use. This feels to me like a lot of this stuff nowadays like really feels a lot like daily fantasy sports, which is this massive new thing in the US. You pay money and it has some vague skill-based aspect. I think people are vaguely aware that people like gambling small amounts of money on stuff to do with what their friends are doing. Being competitive for a bit of money with their friends, and they keep trying to monetize that in video games, and it keeps not working. I mean, this is kind of one of the least weird ones in a lot of ways, because it's pretty straightforward. It's just allowing you to gamble on the round of Call of Duty you're about to play. But, I just don't think that there's a market for this, and it's always much harder to do than it needs to be.
Right. So yes, this is based around a sort of lobby system where you match up with other players. It says you can view your potential opponent before committing, like as kind of an aside. But like, what does that mean? Do you watch their game? Like, how do you know? Do you just see their stats or something? This seems like it's because I don't. I'm having an Ian Hardingham problem here, which is that I can't empathise with someone who might want to do this. I'm trying to do that now. I guess it would be, I'm confident that I can read another player's skill level and that my own skill level is high enough that I can make like a value judgment about whether I'm likely to win. And for that, you need a substantial amount of information. So I just don't know how that's going to happen.
These things I think are very seldom about that. I think like the kind of ethical concept behind gambling in general and gambling on what you're doing is just to make it feel more important, that you're actually adding value even if you lose because you've made it more meaningful. Sorry to butt in there.
Right, but you'll want to evaluate. Even casual gamblers will think about whether the odds are good, right? Like, then they'll use some information, something, or just a feeling to evaluate that. And I just don't know.
It's funny you say that. I'm not calling you silly for saying that, because it sort of sounds like an obvious point. But when I talk to my friends who casually gamble, the reason behind bets they make are just kind of, usually as simple as, it's raining in London today.
Yeah.
Or I didn't like them last time I saw them. So yeah, it usually has to be based on something, right. Some perceived internal knowledge. So yeah, I suppose you'd want to have some information, like, and which games does it work with? Does it have to have some reporting from one of the people? It doesn't feel immediately attractive, I agree.
I think one of the reasons stuff like this always generally fails is that middleman services for games are extremely hard to get working. Literally the only one I can think of that seems to be successful is Raptor, which reports, when you're playing a game and how long you've played it for, i.e. the most basic thing you could extract from some metadata you could extract from someone's play. Other than that, it seems to be very down to the platform holders. Item trading and stuff has to work on the platforms. PS4 Share works really well because it's literally just a button. I don't know of any successful service like this.
Yeah, I completely agree. It is hard to get that right. And I think the other part of why I think this is a non-starter, I just don't think there are a huge number of people who desperately want this, like actively.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what this thing would need. When it came down to fantasy football, there were a huge number of people, especially in the States, who were already betting money in their office pools or whatever. So they actually needed something like this. Like, this was a thing that existed before, and you were selling an easier way of doing it, whereas this is like trying to sell a new thing that I don't think is going to be very attractive to people. And also, tell me if you think I'm wrong about this. I really feel like there's a disconnect between the kind of people who gamble, like by go to a betting shop and gamble, and the kind of people who are into online games enough to do this. I'm not saying it's completely exclusive or anything, but for some reason in my head, those feel like slightly different cultures. Am I just sort of completely off base
No,
there?
I don't think you are. I mean, the only sort of crossover I've ever seen with the people who are really into competitive online games and money is money matches in competitive stuff. So you'll often see kind of high level, Smash players talk about money matches, and this was something that would happen. Like, they all go around someone's house for a tournament, and then like the highlight of the evening where everyone's getting drunk is like some guy money matching someone else for $20, and the loser has to buy everyone pizza. Like, that's something that happens a lot in those communities, and that's kind of the only place I've ever really seen it. Like, if we had a LAN party, I mean, I know we're not indicative of what anyone does because we're old and awful, but if we had a LAN party and someone was like, hey, I'll bet you 30 quid if you beat me, we just look at them in the strangest way. So it's not very British as well, is it?
I feel like it isn't that British. I mean, and these things are always more fun in person as well. Like, all of these online services are trying to put anything that you can possibly imagine into the online space. So I just don't know if this is going to work.
You should have a service where you can mock your friend's particular odd figure of speech online and crowdsource that. Marvellous. Valve had to roll back some changes to a pistol and rifle in a CSGO patch. According to PC Gamer, Valve was hoping to make spraying less appealing. Ian Hardingham, is spraying too appealing?
I'm not answering that. Right, well, I think Valve kind of screwed the pooch on this one a little bit. This is the second major change they've had to roll back in the last couple of weeks.
Yep.
I was kind of amazed at how big the gameplay changes they're still doing in CSGO.
Yeah.
I really can't imagine how much ire you're going to produce by changing the spray patterns of the AK-47 in CSGO. And this was for all of the assault rifles. And then they introduced this massively powerful new pistol. So I'd actually be a bit worried if I was a CS fan, because I'm like, why are they doing this? Is this really necessary? It's going to screw around with the competitive balance.
Yeah, yes.
But they clearly know what they're doing. But I've just reinstalled CSGO. I want to get back into it.
Yeah, I'd like to play some CSGO. I still haven't actually tried it. I think there's some interesting stuff here. With these ongoing games, when developers want to do balance changes, they tend to do, kind of how you and I would like to test something when we're developing a game, which is they make a big change and then they see what the impact is and they iterate around it. But when you're playing the game, that is so annoying, especially if you're trying to get better and you're trying to learn the ins and outs of things. If things keep blowing the metagame open every month, then you're going to get annoyed. And this is one of the things where sometimes we think fan reactions are a bit over the top. I can imagine going on a forum and just unleashing this tirade against the person who's made these changes, and that sort of being enough to push them back. So I think you've got to be a bit careful with how you make changes.
Well, people invest an awful lot of time in CS, and they'll have their favourite weapons, and if their weapon suddenly becomes much worse for their chosen playstyle, that's a real big problem. And again, like, if it's a relatively new game, like Smash even, that's what people have to cope with. That if you start playing an online competitive game, then after 3 months, there's a really good chance there'll be a big patch, which nerfs all the stuff that was really fun to use, and maybe adds a couple of weird new things. But this is CS, people. I mean, I think it's terrifying, the idea of just adding a new weapon. Shifting around all of the old weapons seems really, really weird as well. And I'm just not sure what their end game is with that, because, CS has survived for a long time. They're working on some really good things to make it better. Some of the stuff that they've done, obviously the weapon skins especially, have been massively effective. They can keep on doing things like that. They can keep on improving the spectating. I'm not particularly convinced they need to improve the gunplay at this point.
Yeah, my question really is, when is a game balanced? Like, when do you decide to stop doing it? Is it good that when the metagame stagnates, you want to change things up? I find it really difficult. I mean, I kind of don't know enough about CS. When I watch competitive CS, it seems to be a lot about the interaction between the teams rather than it is particularly about weapon balance. So I think, and I may be misreading the game here, I'm sure someone can point out how stupid this is as a comment, but I think maybe these changes at high-level competitive CS are not quite the same as, say, a unit change in StarCraft or a big, mechanics change in Smash. Yeah, but at the same time, you're going to annoy, the vast majority of people who are playing the game.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much micro skill. I'd say that CS has a much, much, much higher micro skill balance, obviously, than StarCraft. So the metagame's going to be kind of probably like less likely to really badly stagnate in that way, I would guess. And it has been going on for a long time now, this game, and it seems to still work. But, like I was saying, they obviously want to put in some new weapons. I don't know if this is going to be something that they're charging for a certain way. They just want to increase the value of the drops you can get. I'm going to load this up. I'm going to load CS up and have another go at it and see how terribly I suck.
Insane developer Twinbeard have been perpetrating what looks like a massive ARG that may or may not herald the release of Frog Fractions 2. Polygon reports. This is really good. You should go and read this. It involves shaving President Obama, sandwiches, messages hidden in an audio file spectrographs, and many, many uses of the word butts. Ian Hardingham, an incongruously serious question. Are ARGs played out now?
I'm not a big fan of ARGs, I guess. They're the kind of fun that I'm too, like, Scrooge and boring to really like. This thing apparently has been going on for 2 years now. I think they spent much more time on this ARG than they have actually on Frog Factions 2. It's some, like, gigantic joke, which is great. Yeah, like, ARGs are okay. It's not the kind of puzzle solving that I'm massively into. This real-world stuff, I tend to much prefer things that are, like, really fantastical. I'm just talking about myself now. This is fine. Are we going to do an ARG?
I don't want to do an ARG because my problem with ARGs now is that they're not surprising. And I think a lot of them had to be about the mystery. I Love Bees, of course, was the famous one, and that had people going around, various countries to different locations, getting on payphones, recording these weird audio files, putting them together. Every time I see this now, I mean, this one is amazing because, as you say, it's been 2 years, and I'm not knocking this specifically, by the way, because the reason I wanted to talk about this is I think that they've just destroyed it. They've killed the ARG genre with this, the silliest, most definitive one. I mean, you've got Obama there. You can shave him in some kind of weird simulator thing. There's a whole series of tweets between him and his wife and George Bush that you have to decipher. There's bug pornography. I mean, you can't beat this. There's Morgan Freeman's in there. You can't beat it. So I just don't think anyone else can do anything in this genre now. I think it's done.
Okay, we're closing this out. It is now illegal to make an ARG.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Ontological Geek have a piece in their What's It Like to Play column, written by Michael Everton, a writer in his late 50s, discovering video games for the first time. Quite interesting pieces. Do you think that games rely too much on pre-existing game literacy?
This is a very difficult subject for me. So I'm going to start off by making a bad metaphor, which you'll feel very at home hearing. If you give someone like an amazing piece of aged brie, or a beautiful like 50s red wine, then they're not going to know what to do with it. If they've never had cheese before, or they've never had wine before, if you've never experienced those things, you can't just immediately enter into what's basically the meta game of cheese or the meta game of wine and really appreciate all the things going on with that. So I think exactly the same is true of anything that like humans get together to really geek up about and go completely insane about, is that it's almost, it's so completely fundamental that this is built on an incredible history of things, on a lot of people's reactions. It's meant to be complicated, difficult to get into. That's just exactly what it's meant to be. So, if this guy, and he's written a really interesting article, and there's some interesting stuff in here that isn't directly to do with this, if he wants to play, the new Call of Duty or something a bit, like StarCraft 2 or something, or a MOBA, well, yeah, good luck to him. That's kind of not for him, I'm afraid. And I'd have a lot more time with people saying, well, games need to do this more, X, Y, and Z. If it wasn't for the App Store, which has a different kind of game, which you can get into straight away if you've never even touched a phone before. So I'm not sure I really see the problem there. I think it's really interesting to have it pointed out.
Yeah.
That, you know, for us, it's second language to just second nature, to just pick up a mouse and a keyboard and know how to move through an FPS. And yeah, maybe in 50 years there'll be no mouses and keyboards and we'll be doing something else, but it'll probably be almost as impenetrable because that's just the way these things work. We've got touch screens and phones for incredibly accessible things, and, you know, don't take away my heritage.
So this is really interesting. It's kind of about cultural elitism slightly. I mean, we're drawing more from, this is just mostly sort of narrative about how this guy experiences things, and there's another point that he makes which I'll come on to later that I think is very interesting. But a lot of this is about, do you need pre-existing knowledge? To what extent should culture build on your existing knowledge? And that's a very difficult question. I think we're still trying to work that out. If you see the kinds of things that are popular, they tend to be things that don't require much existing knowledge, or rather they didn't. And then we had the rise of superhero movies, which we discussed before, that actually require a bit of kind of canonical knowledge. Culture kind of originally evolved assuming that people would know all of this other stuff, so that makes a lot of earlier works and things very difficult to understand now. And it sort of seems to always be the way, I guess. But I don't know what the answer is here. I think you're going to have these two things developing in parallel: games for people who, inverted commas, don't like games, and games that require, something like the Stanley Parable, which is kind of about games and about what they are and mocks them. So maybe these things need to be developing in parallel.
Yeah, again, I don't really see the problem. I think reading between the lines here, I'm not particularly sure this guy, really has enjoyed the process of getting to know games. He seems a little unconvinced by them, and I don't think he'll still be playing loads of games in a couple of years. He wants to play games by the sound of it to connect more with a loved one, which is awesome. We all try sometimes new things to connect with loved ones.
Yeah.
If he had really connected with it, I think he would love how Byzantine and weird and in-depth this scene is. When I really get into a new craze, there's nothing I love more than reading about how crazy everything is and starting to learn the weird rules of this world. Like Magic the Gathering is a good example. It's so attractive because it's so bizarre.
Yeah.
That's what attracts us as humans, and that's great. And I just, I don't see the problem. And it's not like we haven't spent a lot of time trying to be inclusive. Like, all of the time a company is convinced that if they can make something like an FPS palatable for the unwashed masses of people who've never played a computer game in their lives, they'll make millions and millions of dollars. So I feel like it happens a lot. I just feel like this is more interesting from the perspective of someone who's clearly a scholar, who's got a literary background, and what he makes of games. And again, I feel like the subtext is a little bit negative.
He makes this really interesting point about how he doesn't know when he's supposed to be happy when he's playing a game. And I really like this section. He says that you have to maintain a simultaneous detachment and investment in, say, a character. So when you go around slaughtering hundreds of people, that's not supposed to matter. But when you level up and you get a thing, that's supposed to be the best thing in the world. And I actually still have this problem with a lot of games. As someone who plays a lot of games, I sometimes find like the stuff that you're doing, certainly, when I played COD Blobs, some of the stuff you're doing is like, well, is this fun? Am I supposed to like this? Especially when the aesthetic is really dark and like, you're murdering innocent people or whatever. Do I like this? And then you kind of win and it's like, you did the thing. It just feels completely incongruous. I think this is a genuine problem games still have.
Yeah, I love this section as well. It's a really good thing to focus on. I'm not sure that I feel it. You said you felt it. I'm not sure I get that feeling too much. I guess, we're both pretty used to finding life bizarre and being confronted every day by things which make no sense, to the extent to which suddenly everything makes sense because nothing makes sense. I think the idea of the simultaneous attachment and detachment is a really great sentence.
Yeah.
And makes an awful lot of sense. But again, we don't really need to spend much more time really focusing on how weird games are. Games are weird.
Yes.
And there's something nice about that as well. I'd like to see more people like this who are clearly outside even the fringes of games talking about them in a reasonable, non-hyperbolic way. I'd like to see that because that's what this guy has done. I talked about the subtext being that he doesn't like games very much. I've got no problem with that because I don't think it lets him. He lets it colour the text too much. I think he's just talking about his very reasonable, unemotional in some ways responses to this sort of crazy playground.
Yeah. It seems like
although I'm sorry for him that Diablo 3 is one of the games that he's had to play.
Yes. It seems like he might find some subgenre of games that he likes, but he's clearly not going to be someone who is really interested in games as a whole and continually exploring them. I think that's true. One of the things that's also interesting about this is that you get the sense that he feels like he should know about games. Not just necessarily because, he's got a partner who is introducing him to them, but I think he feels that as someone who knows about culture, he now needs to know about games. And this is a new thing. That this has happened. I've seen several articles like this kind of over the last 2 or 3 years of people saying, like, I didn't know anything about games, but I feel like I should. Now, that's totally
Yeah, people are
new.
feeling alienated
Yeah.
by pop culture now really having embraced games.
Yeah.
Which is completely different to what life was like when we were teenagers. It's cool. I mean, I'm pretty alienated by pop culture game references.
Yeah.
But that's that's pretty normal. I agree that is a wave of things that's happening.
I was listening to Classic FM the other week, and just apropos of nothing, they had a show that was entirely devoted to video game music, which I think is a semi-regular thing. And I thought, they had something like a fully orchestrated version of the Zelda theme, which is absolutely fantastic. And I thought if I thought games were stupid or I didn't know anything about games, and I heard that, I go, wow, I must be wrong. Like, I must have missed out on this huge thing because this exists. So it's interesting. Games culture is real.
Yes.
Long-term friend of Mode 7, Tesh Shrike, flagged up Tom Francis's post on level generation for his game, Heat Signature. What do you think about the current state of procedurally generated levels?
Well, I'm glad this came up this week because we're working on random generation for our current still secret project this week.
Yep.
And I've been working on generators, and I said to you just yesterday online, how some very simple approaches can work really well. I was rude on Twitter about Mr. Tom Francis's generator techniques, but only tongue-in-cheek. The simple fact is that there's the main thing I think about generation is that everything's got to be a bespoke solution. There is every single game that wants generation basically will benefit from a different kind of core generation. It needs to be iterated an awful lot. You have to iterate the generator as much as you would iterate any kind of level design to work out what works well, and it's part of the game iteration as well, because the interaction of the mechanics with the level produces the game. So it's as important really as the mechanics. I don't know what other people are doing. I think a lot of random generation is still very basic. You were saying that you don't think that people really understand how important and what the balance should be between generation and artist created content. With the game that we're currently working on, we have a lot of artist created content, but it still is very authentically a randomly generated game. And I think that you get people who have no coding generation experience and they just do something simple like Spelunky. They want to make a bunch of tiles of varying sizes and put them together. And then you get people who just want to endlessly play with a random generating algorithm, and those tend to produce really boring things. And the sweet spot is really in the middle, where something feels undesigned sort of to the eye, but then keeps producing really exciting things. And when you get that generally means that you've hit the right spot.
So one question I have is something that we've talked about. To what extent do you need to hand make things first and then make a generator that's sort of trying to catch up with how good the handmade thing is, or to design something in abstract that is going to surprise you and kind of then refine that?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. Well done. I think it's got to be a balance again. I think that when you are developing the actual game, you want to use generators as a way of trying out new techniques. So basically, I think it's like a 3-stage process where you start off just algorithmically, and you develop the game and the algorithm as you go. Once you're happy with the game, then you get some people to make a really good handcrafted level. And you get some artists with nothing to do with generation to iterate on it themselves. So a different kind of iteration. And then when you've got a level that you think is like the platonic ideal of what your level should be like, then try and work out how to make a generator that would make that.
Yes, Plato on the podcast. I wasn't expecting that. Yeah, okay, now that's really interesting. So you're kind of talking about prototyping the generator and the gameplay at the same time. I think that might break some people's minds.
Well, I mean, yeah, it does depend on what the game is. With Frozen Synapse, the first level generator was just a massive level that Bin had made, and each randomly generated level was just a small cutout of that massive level.
Right.
And that was very appropriate, and that was absolutely fine.
Yeah.
It depends a lot on what the game is about. I mean, the thing is, though, that if you're making a game, if you're the designer and the programmer at the same time, you really need the game to be surprising you even while you're developing it, which is why it's better to like say, okay, I think I'm making a platformer with generated levels, I think it needs to be 7 screens long. So then you've put in a rule, and then it's still creating surprising things, because even though all of the levels that are being created are 7 screen long, they're still doing unusual things within those screens. So you put in the rules, but hope the generator is still going to surprise you, so you can have like an authentic feeling as a player as you're developing.
Interesting. Okay. Nelson at Video Games and the Bible wrote a piece discussing the idea of mature games and the relationship of mature themes to explicit and offensive content. Do you think that developers reach too soon for the wrong type of mature content?
Yes. I want to really praise... sorry, who wrote this article?
Nelson at Video Games and the Bible.
Nelson. I don't know if Nelson is the Video Games and the Bible person who follows me on Twitter.
He is.
Well, he's a good friend of mine on Twitter, and I was immensely impressed with the quality of this article.
Yeah.
It's covering a very difficult topic. Basically, as you can understand from a website called Video Games in the Bible, this is taking a fairly theological viewpoint on this. The kind of thing that you can imagine there being a lot of very bad articles saying, you should have less explicitness in games. But this has been really good, so I really, really appreciate reading something very even-handed. And in fact, he's not so much talking about, just the evils of sex or anything like that. Talking more about how suggestion is so much more effective than just outright showing things. And who could disagree with that? The question of whether, it's so funny to say games should do this more, because that to me is almost the same as saying games should be better.
Yes.
Like, I love things that use subtlety and suggestion and ambiguity to get the point across better. But, like, those just seem like completely basically good things. And if people were able to do that more, they would be.
The problem that I have with this, and I just want to echo what you said about this being even-handed and very, very interesting. I think the problem with this is that when you put ambiguity into narrative, you get a lot of negative feedback about it. People don't like ambiguity, generally. All of the very, very successful cultural things are very straightforward and generally very dry, very prosaic, and lack ambiguity. So there's that problem. The second thing is that there's such a huge problem in games, and we're going to talk about this now with another topic later on, with the kind of content that you have in. And some people really want sex and violence, and some people really don't want sex and violence, and there's a lot of anger about that. I think that we've probably gone as far as we can go now in terms of using that kind of explicit content for titillation and to kind of make things exciting. And I think more appropriateness is good. But equally, like, as much as people call for it to be used intelligently and lessened, it's never going to be. So I kind of feel like both of the things he's asking for here are just impossible.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with asking for the impossible, but I kind of agree. I mean, I don't know, like, I'm 33, and as we all know, because I go on about it endlessly, I'm married, I have a child, one at the moment,
yes.
Could be 2 soon.
Yep.
And I don't respond to tits in games the same way I used to. And I was never like a very sort of a person who massively enjoyed Dead or Alive Extreme. And I just, I don't really remember how important that stuff was to me when I was 17 or when I was 22, how important it was to other people. I mean, if I'm watching like a really boring documentary and it's got some attractive people in it, that can be nice, not, I'm saying bearing everything, but it can be nice to have some sex value in some things, I suppose. I don't want to just say like it should be nothing at all. I just don't really know how important those things are to other groups of people. Like the things that I like to see in my fiction now, well drawn relationships, like that kind of drama, and I'm not that interested in sort of the story about a 16-year-old girl's sexual awakening or whatever, whereas I might have been 15 years ago. So I don't want to just say that we shouldn't have it. And I think there's always that question when it comes to explicit stuff: is the moral argument that it's bad?
Yeah.
And the kind of thing is that I'm very reticent to make the leap from I don't like this thing to it's bad.
Sure, right. I mean, more sex in documentaries is one thing, but I think the difference between explicit and implicit content is kind of really interesting here. I like the TV show Luther, as I've mentioned to you before. It's a pretty silly show. It's very cartoony. Actually reminds me of a kind of graphic novel a lot of the time. And it was interesting seeing two different episodes by different writers. One of them was basically horror, like it had jump scares, it had this sort of evil serial killer who was literally jumping out of cupboards. And then there was another episode about this guy, again, fairly cliched idea, he was kind of playing life as if it was an open world game. He was making decisions on dice rolls, and he was doing really weird stuff. And the whole point of this character was that he was inscrutable. So it had a lot of scenes of him just deciding what to do, like deciding whether he was going to go into this building and kill people. And then you would see him start walking towards the building and it would cut away. And I found that so much more emotive and powerful than the serial killer jumping out with the horror stabs and the gore and stuff. Because it was like, it was the idea of this guy making the decision to do it that was creepy. So you can have this stuff that's really effective, even in a fairly sort of crass populist way. I'm kind of arguing against my own point now, that is good and people will embrace it, but I think it's just very, very, very hard to do.
Yeah, I just don't generally see, I'm just not one to say an entire medium should do X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
I would like there to be more things that I like, but again, I don't automatically think that means there should be more things I like. So I know it's really boring, but I can't really change sort of the way I basically react to stuff. Like, I'm making some things that are good for me, but that's as far as it goes. I really appreciate someone tackling this area without using a bunch of hyperbole.
As Kotaku report, people on GameFAQs are extremely annoyed about meta RPG Undertale winning a poll for the best game ever. Are we ever going to see a resolution to people fighting over what deserves to be considered a great game?
Yeah, this is really boring. Do people not understand democracy? It's not about the base quality of something. It's about how many people prefer X to Y. There's nothing particularly exciting about it. Yes, there are 5 million people who disagree with you. Sorry, it's not that surprising. There's some good stuff here though. So got a good commenter, Batista Thumbs Up, who reminds us that keep in mind that hijacking GFAQs polls is nothing new. The L block from Tetris once won the character battle contest. Plus, I understand that Undertale is new, but it's also really cool and kind of very gamey. Like I was talking about respecting game culture before in terms of art games. It's really, really Undertale. I haven't actually played it, but having watched videos, it looks incredibly gamey to me.
Yeah.
And looks pretty cool. And I'm really sorry, I'm going to get in trouble for doing this, but I really do not get the massive love for the Ocarina of Time. I'm a Link to the Past guy. I'm happy to see something beat Ocarina of Time. So I'm going to get in trouble for that one.
So there's a few things here. The thing that is really good about the existence of Undertale, and I also haven't played it, and this article made me buy it, so I will possibly try and play some later, because I'm kind of interested in this. I know that friend of the show, Alex Hayes, really likes Undertale. Undertale is kind of the most divisive 4chan game ever, because it really appeals to 4chan, if you can talk of it as an entity, which you can't. It can really appeal to its sense of sort of game lore, as you say. You know, it's a very gamey thing. There's a lot of love for those JRPG style games on there. It mocks that. It's funny in a way that's sort of slightly similar to that sense of humor. But it really divides people, like the hardcore, you know, Vidya people on there really hate it, and it's split that down the middle. So it's so funny to see something that has divided that audience win a vote, which is the thing that they traditionally try and do as a joke, or, you know, to make some kind of point or something. So the fact it's kind of caused this massive snowball disaster effect on this poll. Also, the thing you said about democracy, you have to accept that, yes, people don't like the same things as you, but it's about what people like at that time. So whenever you do a greatest of all time poll, the present is going to massively skew, like, way, way, way above. And then some things that are so far in the past that they're nostalgic will skew way, way above where they should be. That's the nature of this as well. It's time-based.
Yep, hard to argue with that. I mean, the simple numbers, there are more people were alive 10 minutes ago than 10 years ago, or, you know, alive and willing, able to play video games, and also they'll probably remember it better.
Yeah.
You know, it's just funny. I mean, I remember when I was, you know, 16 and liable to get upset about what games were called the best of all time, what console is best of all time. But, you know, it's not something I get excited about anymore. Yeah, you play Undertale. Tell me if I need to play it.
All right. That's the end of that, and now it's time to enter Paul and Ian's nuclear throne of discussion. I don't have too much to talk about this week, because we did talk about it last time, but it's the only thing that both of us play now, so I think we should talk about it again. I'm starting to get to the point where I feel like I need to just improve my skill. Like, when I take damage on early levels, I get annoyed with myself and think, you know, I'm better than this. I should be advancing further into the game. You've now got further than me, which is immensely irritating. So talk about that.
Yes, the proper order of things has been restored. Yeah, it's funny that you get annoyed about that. I don't get annoyed about losing health early on, because it's relatively easy to get back to full health, and I find that the places I die are just the insta-kill stuff, you know, later on. So I've got to World 5, which is, let's just say there's a Visiting the Village disagreement about whether World 3 is an ice world or not. But World 5 is definitely an ice world, and I've got there reliably.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of insta-kill stuff there. So that's the kind of thing that's bothering me at the moment.
Well, hang on. So it goes the wasteland, then the sewers, then the one with the cars and the crows.
Yeah.
And then the ice world. And
in between that is the one that has the diamond things that float.
Is that really after the wasteland thing? That's before the ice world?
It is. I think they have like a one-level dark world between every 3-level light world.
Really? Okay.
So it's the first 3 levels, then it's one with the rats. And the rats are really annoying.
Yeah.
Then it's 3 of the one with the cars, which I thought was the one you were mistaking for the ice level, actually.
Right.
And then there's the one with the funny floating diamond things. This is fascinating for listeners.
This is important,
and then
though.
It's the ice world.
Don't you sometimes get 3 of the sewers one, though? As well?
You mean with the rats?
Yeah. I thought you got 3.
No, it's always one. You can get an extra exit, which then takes you to the turtles.
Oh, okay. That's just one. Okay. Interesting.
Well, I mean, you know, it's always possible I'm wrong. Although, you tell me if you find anything that disputes that.
So this is the thing about this game. Like, I'm trying to not read too much about it. Like, I read a bit, just to get some basic strategy. But actually now I'm just enjoying finding things on my own. Like the Ninja Turtles thing we both found independently, and that's awesome. But I'm kind of like, so I had my sort of vague tier list of upgrades, and then I found that I didn't understand what 2 of them were at all. So I didn't realise that the ammo one, Back Muscle, is like incredibly huge amounts of ammo maximum. Like, it's not just a little boost, it's really good, and that's why everyone always puts that at the top. And also Strong Spirit, the one that it refreshes your health at the start of the next level if you take 1 damage in the current level. It's not expressed like that in the flavor text at all. So I got that one completely wrong. I'm getting the roguelike thing of like, I want to find stuff myself. I don't want too much information from the outside now.
Yeah, I don't tend to read stuff anyway because I'm too lazy to read stuff. And I just tend to like, when I'm playing a game, like even if it's something I love as much as Spelunky, or I love this a lot as well, I'll be really happy to just not understand some part of it, like some massive part of it, and then just ignore it until like a year and a half later, where someone tells me what it is. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I think not knowing things like that really bother you, and I just kind of, for some reason, am able to black it out. So often I,
that's the huge difference in our personalities, is that I feel bad if I don't know something, even if it's irrelevant, and you are really happy if you know enough about something to do what you want. Basically that's pretty much it.
This game is like absolutely brilliant. We should be celebrating this game. This is kind of like, I've got mixed feelings about Vlambeer's back catalogue.
I
don't know how mixed they are even. Like, generally, I think their previous games have had. Well, I mean, Super Crate Box is brilliant, though, in a very, very small way. Luftrausers is really, really mixed, and I think ends up not being that good for me. But this is just like, the fact that someone's created something of this quality for a top-down shooter is like just the best thing ever. And everyone needs to be given a Vita with this on it for Christmas.
Absolutely. I've already said I think it's my game of the year, and I'm happy to start thinking about greatest all-time indie games. I mean, I like it more than Spelunky. I don't think that's ever going to be the case for you, but that's fine. I think I like it more than Binding of Isaac. I think I'm happy to say that now. It's still sort of very different. Again, if I was you, I'm channeling you a lot this episode, I would say it's not the same genre, is what I would say, because they're so different. But I'm really close to it being an all-time favourite game, and I do want to at least finish it. I want to start looping. That's what I want to do. I want to start looping, which is where you get to the end and then you start again in one playthrough. So that's my ambition. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, it's a massive triumph for the Vita.
Yes.
Like, on your Vita now, you can go on a plane. You can have Spelunky, you can have Binding of Isaac, you can have Nuclear Throne, you can have Terraria, you can have Hotline Miami. It's like those are just great games to pass the time with. I mean, there's just no question in my mind that the Vita is not only my favourite handheld of all time, but possibly my favourite console of all time, just because the thing that I want, I know that other people don't want this, the thing that I want is to be able to play a lot of these PC games on my sofa without having a PC open. So if that's what you want, the Vita's absolutely incredible. So big Vita fan over here.
I feel like the combo of PS4 and Vita's certainly my favourite handheld of all time, no question. The combo of Vita and PS4 just feels like Sony understand what I want from games. I've had quite a few instances recently. I had a couple of friends over to my house and played local games on the PS4, which I hadn't done before, and that's just a really great experience as well when it works. You don't have to do the stupid PSN thing. Anyway, it still functions in that traditional console capacity really, really well. And I just kind of use it for everything. This is the hub of my living room. So, yeah, it's great. And this kind of game really does suit that as well. So, yes, Nuclear Throne. We'll talk about it again, I'm sure. Right.
Big win.
Time to go back in time now to 2005, and after the epic marathon of last week, which I had to conduct on my own, Ian Hardingham, no less.
You poor thing, Paul Kilduff-Taylor.
Released in this week, in 2005, thanks to producer Jimmy and Eurogamer, we have Madden NFL 2006 on the PSP. Now, I'm going to stop on this one, because it seems like every single week it's Madden NFL 2006. No matter what month or year, that game is coming out on some platform. And I don't know how that's happened, but this is on the PSP.
We need to have a Madden NFL 2006 watch segment every week.
We need a special sound.
Talking about whether or not it has been released on a platform or re-released.
We need to play the John Madden boom sample every time. Peter Jackson's King Kong on the PSP. Prince of Persia Revelations on the PSP. There's so many of these Prince of Persia games. I think there were 3. There was Sands of Time, there was I Can't Believe It's the Prince of Persia, and there was Revelations. So many. Peter Jackson's King Kong on the GBA as well. Now, you're going to have to give me a second here because my cat is trying to disrupt the show, so I just have to stop that happening.
I'm going to talk about this release schedule while you extricate yourself from that cat.
Yes.
So I hope that this is actually everything that was released this week. I mean, I suppose back in 2005, and to a certain extent, in this year of 2015 as well, people had stopped releasing games by the week before Christmas. But what an amazing week! It's just like 3 PSP games and a GBA game.
I know.
There's something really romantic about that for me.
It's been a weird ghost town to go and walk around Electronics Boutique at that time. Right, that's the end of that. Now we catapult ourselves into the present with the top 10 UK Steam games. And at number 11, it's nothing. I have no idea why producer Jimmy has included an empty 11 there.
What's going on at number 11?
I thought I'd share that with you. Number 10 is Guilty Gear XRD Sign at 20% off. Now, that was number 1 last week. So an interesting drop down there. I haven't read much about this. It's a fighting game. I don't know what the fighting game community thinks of it, but I mean, I guess being number 1 on Steam and then only dropping down to 10 in a week is a pretty good deal for a fighting game. At number 9...
Yeah, kind of intrigued that a non-Street Fighter fighting game could hit number 1 on Steam, actually. So that's a little bit of a surprise to me.
I know it's much anticipated. At number 9, we've got Stranded Deep, and I'm going to be doing my quick stealth Google, and guess what genre of game it is?
Is it a survival game by any chance?
It's a survival game. Take the role of a plane crash survivor stranded somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. Come face to face with some of the most life-threatening scenarios that will result in a different experience each time you play. Is that a valid sentence? Scavenge, discover, survive. And it's in early access. It's an early access survival game.
Well, there you go. There you have it.
At number 8, it's Assetto Corsa Dream Pack 3 at 20% off. Now, again, you can hear the sounds of a stealth Google. This appears to be. What? Hang on. This is DLC for a driving game called Assetto Corsa that I have never heard of. What's going on? Help.
I think Jimmer might have thought this was a April Fool's Day edition of the Steam Games chart.
How is this? What's Assetto Corsa? What is it? I don't know what it is. It's there. I know, I'm checking. It really is there. Assetto Corsa Dream Pack 3. Well, that's floored me. I'm barely able to continue.
Christmas is weird, man.
Number 7 is Hurt World, which I stealth Googled last week, which is, guess what genre of game that is?
I'm just gonna guess survival
again. It's a survival early access game, that's right. This one, what they've tried to do is they've tried to go for like the ultra hard. It's hardcore. It's really hard to survive in Hurt World. Hence, Hurt, a world that hurts. It's a world of hurt. Number 6 is Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege, which I still haven't played yet, but do mean to. Do you have any thoughts on Rainbow Six Siege?
No, I read all the reviews. They said it was like one good multiplayer mode if you were playing with friends, no. And every other aspect of it was bad.
Yes.
Which turned me off it because I don't like playing with friends.
Counter-Strike Global Offensive number 5. Number 4 is Elite Dangerous Horizons, the expansion pack that you mentioned.
Expand Alone.
Oh, is Expand Alone?
Yep.
Really?
You get a £10 discount if you own Elite, but it is an Expand Alone.
And it's early access? Really? You said they weren't doing anything wrong.
Well, they're going to make a lot of money. They want to charge you once a year, I think. That's
okay. Okay. Good lord. Number 3 is Squad, which is stealth Google. What is this? What is going on? Squad is a 50 versus 50 multiplayer first-person shooter that aims to capture combat realism through communication and team play. So, I guess it's an Arma-type game.
Okay.
It's early access.
Looks a bit like Arma.
It's an Arma game, I guess. So that's weird. I've never heard of that. Where are these games coming from? Like, why is stuff coming out in early access that we've never heard of that is just landing at number 3? That's the thing that I don't understand. I mean, I just don't know. Fallout 4.
You've heard of the first 2 on this list.
Fallout 4 is number 2, and Grand Theft Auto 5 at 40% off is number 1. That's the end of that. Now we've got a brief television and film lounge area. And I wanted to quickly talk about the X-Files, because I only very patchily watched the X-Files at the time, owing to, among other things, not having Sky in the 90s. And so I started watching it from episode 1 of season 1. And it's very interesting. It's very dated. Some of the episodes are incredibly bad. The last one I saw was about an astronaut who did a spacewalk and got infected with a space ghost. And then he came down to Earth and the ghost made him sabotage NASA, which is really good. They kind of combined all the things that were good about the X-Files in that one. That one's terrible. There are some really great episodes, some great sort of ominous stuff happening. Really good at that. But you don't like the X-Files, and I wanted to know why.
No, I mean, I have plenty of respect for it. It was never my thing to stop. I didn't like creepy things back when I was young. I don't really like creepy things now. I've also got a bit of a weird issue with the X-Files, which is, you know, the show Fringe.
Yes.
Basically, kind of the most recent proper new X-Files. And I basically like Fringe quite a lot. I certainly like it more than I like the X-Files for a couple of reasons. It's a bit lighter-hearted than the X-Files, which is good. But most importantly, it actually does something. Like, it actually changes the world.
Right. Yes.
The bad guys actually take over the world in season 4, which is awesome.
Right.
And I really respect that.
Yeah.
And, like, a lot of the lore is great, and it actually does something. But the thing is, so not only do I kind of like the X-Files less because I like Fringe, the things I don't like about Fringe are exactly the things that are also wrong with the X-Files, so it sort of makes me like it less in that way as well.
Sure.
Like, the amount of filler on these shows is so extreme, and I really like... I don't like the genre very much, like, sort of, like, creepy horror kind of stuff. I don't like it enough to want to watch a crappy mid-season filler episode.
Yeah.
Like, I want all plot all the time. Like, I want stuff to be moving forward. I don't want the really atrocious, like you were talking about the space thing. That sounds exactly like the kind of terrible thing that this show does. So yeah, basically, whenever I have enough energy to watch these kind of shows, I watch Fringe.
So the thing, I mean, you don't like Monster of the Week generally, and this is like the first season of X-Files is the most hardcore. It's kind of why people do Monster of the Week stuff now. It's so hardcore. Every episode is this ludicrous, discrete thing. I mean, there's a whole episode which is just a complete rip-off homage of The Thing in the first episode, so it's literally set in an Arctic base and they all have to go there and there's a parasite. It's just so silly. But the thing I find with it is that the good episodes, I think, genuinely have some stuff that TV kind of needs to pick up on still constantly. Things like you have very well-established preconceptions and then it constantly subtly changes them through the episode. Good dialogue, good writing. And then the bad stuff for me is so hilariously bad that I'm happy when I draw an episode with terrible CG and it's kind of a nice chase of something good. So I am enjoying it for those reasons. I haven't seen Fringe. That does sound like something I might like as well. So I may watch that. But there we go.
There we go.
That's the end of that. Now it's time for your listener questions, and Toby Pinder asks, which video game character, exempting the ones in Smash already, do you want to see devoured and cloned by Kirby? And what ability? I would like to see Kirby devour and clone a Colossus from Shadow of the Colossus, and I would like him to absorb their emotional resonance, and then just stand on the stage looking majestic. So that's
an excellent answer.
Thank you.
I'd like Kirby to consume Garrett from Thief and clone his ability to fire arrows that carpet the floor in moss so you can't hear the herd walking on there.
I would also like that. That's good. Now we've got some responses from Cheshire, and he starts talking about the AI director topic that we had a long time ago. And I thought I'd raise this with you because it's something you feel very strongly about, and he has kind of an interesting perspective. He says, I'm not terribly bothered by the idea of just-in-time dynamic content, such as create an interesting city when the player is driving along. I think, he says, the trick is to make it feel like it was already there, which I think would be rather difficult. If I drive in a random direction and a new city pops up exactly 3 minutes into every drive, well, that's dynamic content done poorly. But to completely bar yourself from player reactive dynamic content generation feels like it would remove a useful tool from your development options, especially when trying to allow for a player-directed open-world experience.
Yeah, well, I mean, I still think that's slightly missing the point, because I don't think the example of the cities one is very good, because yes, I think it's clearly a bit weird if you're you're creating a new city because the player hasn't seen a city in 3 minutes. I think that's clearly weird. But what we're talking about is really whether or not it's okay to have experiential balancing. You know, it's like there's a monster here of a certain type if you haven't seen that type of monster in a little while, you know, or if you've just had a very difficult thing that took you a long time to kill X number of zombies and it ended up being a bit of an epic experience, then the AI director sort of dynamically gives you a bit of a rest afterwards. And I still think there's a massive kind of like pseudo-ethical argument about whether, you know, to what extent that's okay. You know, it's like even at Game of Thrones, Nuclear Throne has this issue.
Yeah.
Because they give you ammo, which is relative to the kind of gun that you're wielding. Which, you know, is, again, clearly sort of designed experiential stuff in a game that's kind of meant to be about emergent stuff. And Spelunky's very, very, like, hard line about never doing anything like that. So I think it's kind of, that's the discussion for me.
Right. I would like to see some examples of this done really, really well. I think that that Cheshire might have hit on something here, which is that it might be good spice for something which otherwise doesn't compromise in this way. It might be good to have something that almost never does this, but there are certain things where it might kind of bump things along a little bit in a certain direction. That would be kind of my interest in it. But I agree, like, a lot of the time, you know, you want something to feel coherent. I've never liked auto-leveling in the Bethesda games and stuff like that. You want things to feel coherent, like you're really investigating something that exists already, independent of you, and isn't, you know, you're not the centre of it. But equally, there might be a few things that you could do to just bump things along. Will you permit that in your world?
Yeah, because again, I do say it's the question. I'm not really coming down on one side or the other to a massive extent. I think, you know, for sort of world layout, I don't think it should be the AI director should be involved. I mean, anytime the AI director gets involved, you're kind of losing freedom. You know, because it's pretending that you're living in this free world, but it's imposing kind of a linear experience on you. You know, which can often be exactly the right decision. But for me, it's just one of those things where it's kind of like it's a fun pub discussion, deciding which is okay and which isn't okay.
Yeah.
As we sort of kind of doing here.
I can imagine something as well. I'm sort of musing here. One of the things we talked about was coming across random battles, which is something that Fallout sort of forces a bit. And people always like. If you could have some input into the AI for the factions that says, hey, why don't you have the battle here? You know, rather than if they're trying to, if it has something which is choosing where to attack, if they generally choose to attack nearer the player or something like that, maybe that's quite a good way of doing it, where it just puts a sort of spin on it slightly.
Yeah, I guess. I guess that would be fine. I mean, it's kind of, yeah, because again, this really came up talking about how weird Fallout 4 is. It's supposed to be this massive wasteland, but they very specifically want you to come across something really interesting every like 50 meters. So it just feels like it really feels a lot like you're in a theme park.
Yeah.
That is totally the feeling in Fallout 4. So, you know, but you know, then I just kind of think that stuff's, you know, done badly. I still think it's plenty worthwhile, but where it's bad, you know, decisions you make in level 1 of Nuclear Throne or certainly Binding of Isaac, certainly Spelunky, these are things where if you want to get really good, you have to be making the right decisions there that don't have an impact until, you know, a quarter of an hour later. I think AI director stuff really undermines that, because it's saying, like, the kind of thing that AI director might do is flip you some more ammo if you're really low on ammo. And that's exactly the kind of thing which is not good for those kind of games, like the 3 games I just mentioned, the sort of the hardcore roguelike-likes or roguelites, whatever you want to call them, where the whole idea is to sort of get generally better, making the right decisions all the way through.
On the Nintendo NX, Cheshire says, I would love to see some sort of AR implementation with a much better controller with integrated screen angle. The Wii U controller was too large for me to use for long durations and wasn't terribly comfortable. My wife likes it though, and she's a bit smaller than myself, so I could be the weird one here. A better controller with integrated screen, perhaps akin to what the Vita is to PS4 Remote Play, would be excellent, but a little too normal for Nintendo, which makes me think VR or AR. But I think they're still VR shy. AR, on the other hand, would have tons of Amiibo tie-ins, and they seem to be heavily invested in the Amiibo. So Cheshire's going for an AR console. Now, I read this and I thought, that's crazy, but then I thought, also, it's Nintendo. They could be doing this. That's actually not a bad call.
Yeah, I like the call a lot. I will be watching with real interest. It definitely could be something AR related. I think the kind of my gut reaction, my first reaction, my knee-jerk reaction, you might say, is that AR might be a bit limiting.
Yeah.
I think that you often need to have like a stable table to play it on, or that kind of thing. Having said that, Nintendo could be the guys to get this right. Just to address the first part of this, I really think that having like a screen on your controller that you use for stuff a lot of the time is just a bad thing to have. I just basically think it kind of like splits your attention in a weird way, and ends up kind of being almost necessarily gimmicky because you can only look at one of the screens at once. So I kind of just basically actually think that that's bad console design, but that's just me.
I think that you could have a controller with a very small screen that you can use for maybe 3 or 4 touch buttons or areas, and not have it be this thing where you're supposed to actually sort of be looking at it the whole time. Like in an RPG, just having some inventory management things, like having a button that does health.
Yeah, I agree with that, but that's not enough to be the concept for a console. Yes, that would be like I agree, that'd be a nice little controller addition.
That might be where that's going, is what I'm saying.
Sure.
So finally he says, where is the line between episodic games and regularly timed DLC content releases? It seems there should be some useful grey area there. I mean, you spend a lot of time talking up Magic the Gathering and their regular content drops. I'm not sure that those things kind of equate. I mean, episodic game tends to imply narrative, so it means that you can't finish the game unless you have all the episodes and you've waited for them all to come out, whereas DLC sort of just adds stuff to an existing whole product, I guess.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So that's the distinction there. Good. We end on...
I don't have anything to add to that. I think that you took a slightly difficult thing to differentiate and did it well.
We end on a note of agreement. A good show, I think. Thank you for joining us. We would like to get some more listeners. So if you like the show, please tell your friends to go to visitingthevillage.com and have a listen to the show, because we like the show and you like the show and we'd like more people to like it. I'm Mode7Games on Twitter and he's Ian Hardingham on Twitter. You should follow us. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
That's it, children. Time for bed. Don't forget to pay us a visit at www.visitingthevillage.com.